Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Moms Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
How do you inspire your kids to have a clue? In other words, self-awareness. This means seeing themselves as others see them, but more so as God created them to be, the best versions of themselves. Asking kids to strive to reach for the stars is easier than you think. In this podcast, I'm going to delve into how we can help our children by inspiring them. Hey friends, and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and today we are going to talk about inspiring kids to understand self-awareness. This is episode 539, and you can find today's show notes at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Once again, I want to thank our sponsor, CTC Math. You can find more information at ctcmath.com. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this 6-part series. Topics include listen, learn, cooperate, succeed, empathize, and this podcast, self-awareness. You can find these episodes on the website at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Basically, self-awareness has several components. Probably there are even more, but I'm going to stick to these 7. It's basically the key to understanding interpersonal interaction, the ability to recognize our emotions, to recognize and react to different situations, the ability to recognize behavior that is good and that is inappropriate so it can be corrected, the ability to identify weaknesses, the knowledge of good values, the knowledge of beliefs, and for a child to acknowledge adult expectations. As children get older, they learn from different situations and expectations within their homes. Kids learn to develop good and bad behavior based on the level of correction within the home. Do your kids get away with meltdowns and whining? Do you give in when your kid nags for their way? If you say no, do they listen? Or does your child walk away and pretend not to hear when you ask them to do something? Well, how do you encourage your child to be aware of their actions or inactions? Typically, it begins with discipline, along with a good dose of encouragement. Years ago, as a young homeschool mom, I sat with a group of women who were upset with me as I shared that I felt my child's behavior and lack of self-awareness was directly reflected on my parenting style. I was basically taking ownership for their bad behavior because I tended toward the description of a threatening, repeating parent. Do what I say, or I'll count to 10. Do you hear me? Yes, you. Now, okay, I'm going to be counting. And then when you got to 10, the kid didn't even do what you asked him to do. So a lively discussion began, which included rebuttals such as excuses for personality traits or different children needing special handling or situations where, the kids definitely didn't know or didn't mean to, or they had an excuse for why they weren't doing what they were supposed to do, because each parent was sharing some of the situations they were struggling with. I was also told that kids are kids and they need some latitude to express their independence. Well, I didn't leave that discussion with the moms victorious at all, but I planted seeds. Years later, one of the moms admitted she was upset with me and what I said because she realized her unruly children were not exhibiting any self-control, and she went way out of her way to make sure to diffuse situations before they happened. But basically, she confided that they had me-centered attitudes that was catered to by the family. At the time, she refused to take any responsibility for her child's bad behavior, but she realized she needed to set strong guidelines, and her children struggled to adhere to the new guidelines. I mean, just think about it. If you haven't really had any guidelines, and now all of a sudden you're instituting a bunch of different things because you want them to be aware of their behavior or be self-aware of how they interact with others, it's going to be difficult. So if you're in this situation, start slowly. Eventually, she was successful, and her bright child exceeded academically, socially, and spiritually within the homeschool environment. And she told me she felt like her child had blossomed and become the amazing young lady that God wanted her to be. What guidelines are we talking about here? Well, things such as bedtime routines, completion of schoolwork before fun activities or lessons, and also how you talk and interact with siblings. She found that her stricter guidelines and gentle corrections and encouragement were all her child needed to thrive. Listen, my kids aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and these ladies in the discussion group watched situations on field trips where I pulled my son or daughter aside and spoke quietly to them about expectations. Sometimes my kids listened, and sometimes they didn't. One of my sons always told information instead of asking a question when we were on field trips. I'd remind him often that if he raised his hand to participate, he needed to ask a question, not tell the guide something of interest. This child, my oldest, could be labeled as learning challenge, and I could have made all kinds of excuses for him. But I didn't. My husband and I decided early on that we were going to treat him just like we would any other child, and he thrived. I allowed my son to see the big picture by asking him how he saw the situation, and I tried to lead him in a discussion and ask him what he thought about letting other kids have an opportunity to ask their questions. We discussed this, and sometimes he'd agree, and other times he didn't. Kids can and should develop their independence. This should be allowed, and they should be able to make good and bad decisions, but they also have to see the consequences of their actions. How else do they exhibit self-control and stop before they act without thinking about the outcomes? My two younger boys had a situation where they were playing with a dartboard in our lanai. Behind the dartboard was a sliding glass door. The younger of the two said to his brother, "Well, what happens if we miss?" And his brother said, "Well, just don't miss." Well, the younger sibling did miss, and it shattered the door. So the end of the story is that they were required to pay for the door, to have it replaced. And the man that came to fix the door was shocked when the kids pulled out their banks and they pulled out a lot of small bills in order to pay for the bill. He later told me that he was very impressed and we were teaching our boys a very valuable lesson. The older of the two boys who made the decision, the bad decision, to let his younger brother do something, had to pay 3/4 of the bill, whereas his younger sibling paid a small amount. The boys are now 25 and 29, and they still talk about the story. The 29-year-old complains that I made him pay more, and then he goes on to agree that he was the responsible one and gave his younger brother permission to do it. Sometimes your kids are going to agree with you, and it may take many years later for them to do it. Look at the list above that I read and think about how your child exhibits emotions. Is it over the top or is it controlled? Our expectations for a 2 or 4-year-old are definitely going to be different for a 10-year-old or even a teenager. I listened to a mom discuss a variety of snacks with her preschooler. The child wanted a particular snack that they ran out of, and the mother offered many different substitutions, and she even offered to make a grilled cheese sandwich for her child, and her child said, "Okay." Well, once the sandwich was made, the little one refused to eat it and demanded again the snack they didn't have. Well, then this mother offered to go to the store and get the snack. I was appalled, but I didn't say a word. What is a 4-year-old going to learn from this situation? Listen, we all parent differently, and maybe you do the same thing. Having one child differs from having multiple. If you have multiple children, you can't stop and give in to every child's whim. Having only one child definitely gives you the ability to cater to the child for the sake of peace. But again, what are you teaching? Are you teaching this child self-control? Also, with interactions. Have you ever watched little ones on the playground? It's really interesting, and a lot of it does have to do with personality. But as a parent, we can intervene, first of all, by setting the groundwork of what is expected when a child goes to the playground. The next very important fact, and I'm guilty of this myself, is really being vigilant, watching your child, even if that means taking your friend who you went to the park with and standing on the playground as you watch them interact. That way, you can help to diffuse situations. But again, letting kids interact with other kids does teach self-awareness. If another child is not doing what's right, you can ask your child what they would do differently and use another child's bad behavior, definitely not while it's happening, but in the car later, to explain how a behavior could be made right. And ask the child, what should that little one have done? In the situation of the snack, I would do it differently. I'd probably be angry with the whining, if truth be told, and I'd probably need a little bit of a timeout in order to be able to handle it without yelling at the child. But one way to handle this is to identify with the child's feelings. I understand you're hungry and you really want those cheese puffs, but do we have any left? I'd ask. And I'd wait until the kid answered. And if they said no, I would say, "Do you know why?" And they might say, "Yeah, I ate him." So I would say, "Well, let's put it on our grocery list and get some next time we shop. Today you can have crackers and cheese or popcorn. Pick one of those two snacks, and if you don't want either, there will be no snacks today." And then the hard part, you have to stick to that. The child would understand that they have to make a decision and that there are consequences. No to the alternatives means no snacks. And the child soon learns that they can't manipulate the situation by being upset or using emotional blackmail. They also learn self-awareness and eventually self-control. Listen, I know this isn't easy, and having an unruly preschooler is not fun. But kids are so smart. They know, and they can manipulate with the best of them. My mom and I had a discussion after I had 2 children, and I expressed my dismay over the fact that, "Gosh, Mom, it's harder for me when I discipline my kids than it is for them. They get over it so much easier and faster." And she said, "Welcome to parenthood." And that's true. It's difficult to inspire our kids to have self-awareness. It's difficult, but it is so worth it. And good behavior is often ignored, and the same goes for bad behavior. I remember reading a parenting book that said, congratulate your kids when they're doing something good or catch them doing something good. Bad behavior, on the other hand, we hope will go away without giving it any attention. Sometimes if it's minor, it will, and the child will self-correct. But other times we need to intervene. If we ignore bad behavior, we're training our children to fall into sin, and this is not to grow into the child that the Almighty God has made them to be. The key is to have your child identify the situation and their reactions. And listen, sometimes it takes way too much talking, and none of us have time for it. But my question to you is, what's the alternative? Kids today are growing up in a narcissistic society where everything is me-centered. The selfie mentality, the idea that what I want is more important than what other family members want or need, and the instant society that we live in. You can go and get a complete meal in minutes at a fast food place. In years past, that was unheard of. In fact, often when we are struggling with our kids and discussing right behavior, it can be a point of disagreement between spouses. I think most of the arguments I had with my husband that were serious were over disciplining our children. So that's something that you really need to get with your husband or wife about and make sure you're both on the same page. You know, there are selfless kids. There are kids that I see all the time that have good attitudes, or they do what's right, or know almost instinctively what needs to be done. But I've also seen kids who have had the right way of doing something, but basically while they're doing something right, it kind of negates itself because they're exhibiting anger or self-righteousness. Angrily pushing past another child to help this child with a chore or getting the kid a drink of water that can't reach the pitcher. So even if we're doing something right, I would point out to my children, being angry about it kind of negates it, and it doesn't help. It's commendable and rewarding when you do things with the right attitude. Also, understanding an area of weakness is important. We have kids who are perfectionists. We have kids who are sloppy. We have all different kinds of kids, don't we? The goal is to recognize that we can self-correct without always being told what to do. The goal is to recognize what we should do, to recognize good values and the importance of hard work and working toward that goal. Play acting, once again, as I've explained in other podcasts in the Inspire series, is a good way to teach a lesson without using a highly charged or emotional time when the unacceptable behavior is happening. One bonus of self-awareness is that self-esteem improves. If a child's able to control emotions and behavior in different situations, they're going to be proud of themselves. And of course, we can let them know this as well. It's really important to encourage our kids as much as we can. We can practice self-awareness as well and look at ways to improve. In this way, we can give our children examples of our own behavior and things that we're trying to accomplish and improve upon as well. I remember when I would, encourage my kids to journal. Well, then I would sit down and journal with them. I would encourage my kids to read the Bible. And then they would see me each morning reading my Bible. So if we want our kids to exhibit good behavior and good self-control, we need to give them an example. There's also reasons why it's important, even as an adult, to act accordingly, even in the midst of confrontations. This includes having a difference of opinion. And one way we can do this is to practice debating a topic. Can we debate rationally, calmly, and with self-control? Are we self-aware, the things that we say and how we say them? How can we say things without being cruel? Well, we can take a heated issue and try this with your family. It can be eye-opening. This is the tip of the iceberg in the discussion of self-awareness, self-control, and the outcome of self-esteem. But I'm telling you, it's all worth it. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this series on inspiring our kids. I just thank God for the opportunity to be with you today. You can visit vintagehomeschoolmoms.com and look for this episode 539. And it is the last in the Inspire series. So check out the links on the website and the show notes, and you'll find the rest in the series. Take care. God bless. Share this episode with a friend. And as always, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.